What is a personal myth, and why is it important to you? To answer this, we first need to look at what the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung saw the function of myth to be. Jung's investigation of the contents of dreams, as well as the hallucinations of his psychotic patients in his clinical practice, led him to conclude that there were innumerable psychic interconnections, for which he said he could find parallels to. These parallels were found in mythology. As a result of this, he reached the conclusion that the precondition for myth formation must be present within the structure of the psyche itself. Here he started to think about the existence of the collective unconscious, filled with archetypal structures, experiences and themes. Imagine all humans share a kind of hidden ancient library in their minds. This library isn't filled with books, but with universal patterns, images and ideas that have been around since the dawn of humanity and maybe before. These patterns are what Carl Jung called archetypes. Think of them as basic blueprints for characters, situations or symbols that appear again and again in stories, myths and even our dreams, no matter where people live. For example, there's a hero archetype, a common idea of someone brave who overcomes challenges, or a mother archetype, representing nurturing and care. We're not born knowing these, but our minds seem to instinctively recognise and respond to them because they're part of this shared human library. In the early myths of mankind, the gods and goddesses were representative of these psychological happenings that had played out many times over and over in the experience of human beings, and then they were reimagined in the stories of their descendants that came after them. In his own time, Carl Jung saw that the myth that rooted Western culture, that of Christianity and the story of Jesus Christ, had lost its potency, and that many people were left living without a myth, or, to put it another way, outside of a myth. For these people, he said they were like one uprooted, having no true link either with the past or with the ancestral life which continues within them. His solution to this was that people make a conscious effort of understanding their own personal myth. He called it the task of tasks. For him, personally, and ultimately everybody else. You may be asking yourself, why should I care about discovering my own personal myth? The reality of why you should, I believe, should not be brushed over. Jung's idea of personal myth was not simply just a tool to be utilised to discover one's potential or to actualise oneself, a take it or leave it self-development method to improve one's life. It was also a way of noticing whether your life might be on a collision course with disaster. We can start to understand this more when we look at how Phil McCash writes. It is not possible to live outside myth. According to McCash, there exist only two alternatives: to acknowledge one's existence inside a myth, or to exist within a myth without conscious awareness. So, we're starting to establish in a sense what a myth may be for us in the interplay of our psychology and the happenings of events and situations around us, and we've established that we're all within a myth of some sort. We can imagine this both culturally and personally. But what happens if we take what McCash presents as option 2 and exist within a myth without conscious awareness of it? Jung states that men have mythical fates just as much as the Greek heroes do. Although this comment was not written in direct relation to the idea of personal myth, it can be inferred that personal myths entail fates along with them. Firstly, when Jung states men, he obviously means human beings. Jung proposes that archetypes, or those embedded structures of experience that emerge from the human psyche and in human behaviour, have an impact on these fates when he writes, "It is perfectly possible, psychologically, for the unconscious or an archetype to take complete possession of a man and to determine his fate down to the smallest detail." Additionally, Jung has further clarified the significant value he attributes to the influential role that archetypes play in influencing human behaviour over and beyond free will. In a letter to the author and diplomat Miguel Serrano, Jung pens that modern man is not master in his own home, and that he should carefully study the other side of his psychic world, which seems to be the true ruler of his fate. Jung also wrote that the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. So, if we take all of that, we could maybe start to infer that an individual's mythological fate is somewhat determined by whether they are aware of the unconscious archetypal forces that may be partially dictating their actions and their perceptions. To understand this further, let's take a look at an example. Firstly, we'll look at the archetypal pattern that may appear within the psyche and play an effect on the person that fails to recognize it. An examination of the archetypal pattern of the pueri aeternus, or the forever child, for example, can provide more clarity. For instance, when von Franz discusses how the pueri type, entangled in what she calls Don Juanism, overlooks their internal circumstances, it illustrates how an individual's external destiny can materialize. She writes, "He is looking for a mother goddess, so that each time he is fascinated by a woman, he has later discovered that she is an ordinary human being. Once he has been intimate with her, the whole fascination vanishes, and he turns away disappointed, only to project the image anew onto one woman after another." Okay, and see how it might appear in the modern day context. If we think about this part of the quote, this cycle of projection, idealization, disillusionment, and abandonment mirrors the endless swiping on dating apps in the modern day. Each match holds the promise of something transcendent, but once reality sets in, the enchantment fades. It's not the person that disappoints, it's the collapse of the myth we've unconsciously cast them into. Think of it as a kind of digital Don Juanism, an archetypal myth re-emerging in the modern day, perhaps in your life. Consequence of living this out is a deepening alienation. Like Don Juan, the modern data becomes trapped in an endless pursuit, not of love, but of an ideal that doesn't exist. Each new encounter promises redemption, but delivers repetition. In the end, he isn't collecting lovers, he's fleeing intimacy. The tragedy isn't just the failed relationships, it's the slow erosion of the capacity to love at all. And without being aware that you're in that myth, we would risk becoming those modern day digital Don Juans, forever chasing illusions, mistaking projection for connection. But when we face our personal myth, or become aware of it, we reclaim the power to love, in this instance, to choose, and to live beyond the scripts we didn't know we were following. Okay, so moving on. If we inevitably live within unique and personal mythologies, how can we begin to notice the shape of those stories, both to avoid falling into a tragic mythological fate, and also to move toward the fullest of who we might become? Lucy Huskinson offers an important clue. She claims that myth is the more familiar and subtle routines and patterns of our personal experience, as well as extraordinary feats of embroidered characters. In other words, myth isn't just something grand and distant, it's also the everyday patterns we unconsciously enact. To grasp this more deeply, we can turn to a phenomenological lens. That is, focusing on how our myths show themselves in experience, rather than reducing them just to abstract concepts. Through this lens, Huskinson argues that narrative patterns give meaning to human life across personal, social, and even transcendent dimensions. Continuing in this vein, she draws on Heidegger's notion of rootedness, writing that myth is that which sustains our rootedness to the world and the vehicle through which we find meaning, and the roots to our being and our relationship with the world. In this sense, myth becomes the invisible structure that anchors us in meaning. Ultimately, Huskinson suggests that myth is the story of a human's life, which is itself rooted within a collective narrative of basic human behavioural patterns. Seen this way, our personal mythology is both uniquely ours and deeply shared, woven into the broader human drama. As Jung noted, we are often swayed by the spirit of the times, the dominant currents of thoughts, desire, and identity in the culture around us. These collective myths can both obscure and illuminate our personal ones. Sometimes they exaggerate our shadows, other times they mirror back our deeper truths. Take, for example, the rise of Don Juanism that we just mentioned. In the collective psyche, it's reflected in media, dating culture, and the glorification of endless choice. This cultural myth of romantic pursuit without commitment may signal more than just a social trend. For some, it reveals a deeply personal narrative, the quest for wholeness diverted into an endless loop of projection and disappointment. Recognizing these collective tides can offer clues to the myths we may be living in personally on an unconscious level, and that is subsequently a chance to re-author them with that new awareness. Now, you still may be thinking that it doesn't feel like you're living in a myth, but it is the overlooked mundanities of our daily lives, our habits, encounters, and emotional rhythms that may hold quiet clues to the deeper story unfolding beneath the surface. These patterns often go unnoticed, simply because, like a fish in water, we've been immersed in them for as long as we can remember. So, how do we begin to notice the meaning embedded in these everyday experiences and interactions? Susan Rowland astutely highlights a cyclical undercurrent beneath the seemingly linear narrative of Jung's life. As she observes, the recounting of dreams that contribute to the flow of outer events is in itself a formal repetition of a narrative device in which linear time and logical causality are suspended. This points to a deeper structure where inner and outer realities echo one another outside of straightforward chronology. She goes further, showing how this repetition takes form through substitution. Substitution is another form of repetition, in which structurally similar elements take each other's place in ways that disrupt their historical particularity. One example she gives is Carl Jung's rupture with Freud, which she suggests was itself a repetition of his refusal to respect the religious authority of his actual father, a symbolic reenactment of conflict with paternal authority. Ultimately, Rowland argues that meaning in Jung's life, and perhaps in all personal mythologies, emerges through repetition with a difference, the return of familiar patterns in new forms. These echoes do not merely repeat the past, they enrich it, offering depth and coherence to the story we may only just be beginning to see. It's worth remembering that personal mythologies don't always reveal themselves in grand gestures. Often they emerge in moments of disruption, those emotional tremors that hint at something deeper beneath the surface. By turning toward these moments with honesty and tracing the recurring themes in our lives, we can begin to clear the internal fog that distorts our perception. As we get out of our own way, we become more attuned to the richness already present, the meaningful connections, the quiet passions, and the authentic callings that invite us towards our highest potential. In this space, we begin to glimpse the beauty and possibility embedded in our own unique mythology, not in some far-off heroic narrative, but in the seeming mundanity of day-to-day life, where the myth has always been quietly unfolding.